when we looked at the communication matrix previously, one of the key things that we looked at was that of sending information. Now, sending information is part of your job as a communicator, but receiving information is also very important. And this is where active listening comes into play. So what I want you to consider is the fact that most of us have been listening since before we were born. In the womb, we'd hear sounds and react to them. As a child, you would hear. And there's a big difference between hearing and listening. As you grew up, you learned to listen out for certain audio cues, verbal tones. If somebody calls your name stridently, you're going to react quicker than if somebody calls it casually. So verbal cues start to feed into our hearing, and we start to learn to identify different sounds as having a higher priority than others. Now, when you become a communicator, salesperson, customer service person, whatever it is you do, you start to identify what sounds are important, and the way you listen becomes vital. Now, great customer service cannot be delivered unless you listen excellently, and that means active listening. Now, some of you may never have been taught how to listen properly, ever, because it's something we do, like breathing. And yet, breathing, good breathing, can improve our mood. If you do yoga, it can improve how we talk. If you do vocal training, if you sing, you've got to have breath control. If you're a sports person, you've got to be able to breathe. If you're giving birth, they teach you how to breathe to get things done. Same with listening. So let's look at passive listening or hearing. It's also known as lazy listening, but I call it hearing or passive. So in passive listening, your mind wanders. It will have happened today. At some point, you will have turned off. You'd have thought about something else. You might have thought about lunch. You might be thinking about it now. You'll be thinking about what you've got to do tonight or what you did yesterday, because our mind can only concentrate on one subject for between 15 and 20 minutes before it starts thinking about other things. That's why it's very hard to deliver intense training or intense speaking or intense teaching without getting into action. Does that make sense? Good. So, when your mind wanders, it means that if someone's giving you a certain amount of information, up to 50% can be lost because your mind has wandered. And that's if you want to listen. If you don't want to listen, the figure gets into the high 80s. And if you're emotionally troubled, you're upset, angry, scared, then that figure becomes so low, like I can't tell you. So you might lose 95% of what's said to you. For example, have any of you got any friends? Okay, good. Thank God. One of you's got a friend. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had a situation where you've been talking to a friend and they've been upset? Okay. So when they're upset and you're talking to them, did you ever have to say, why aren't you listening to what I'm saying? Look, I've told you this before. Are you hearing what I'm telling you? Right, okay, why? Because they're upset or they're angry. Interesting. We're going to look at something called fight or flight in a second. But first, let's look at the fact that when someone's not listening or wanting to listen to you, you're losing them. You're losing the data that's being sent to you. That's what happens in passive listening or just hearing. Now, if you want to give good customer service, whether that's inbound, outbound, sales, however you want to do it, you must listen actively. And active listening means focused attention. means paying attention 100% to what that person's saying. That also means not thinking about what you want to say next. And that is extremely important. Don't think about what you want to say next whilst that other person's talking. The reason that you mustn't do that is because if you're thinking about what you're going to say next, you're not actually listening to what they're saying. Because part of your mind is thinking about what you want to say next. Hence, you lose data. Now, in communication, many people want to be able to get their oar in because they are lacking the confidence that they'll get an opportunity to speak, which means that you have to take your time and let the other person speak. Because if you don't give them that time, they're going to talk forever. That's what you're thinking. But actually, people have to breathe. And if you understand how to control conversations correctly, you'll know that if you simply say, okay, so what you're saying is this, would that be correct? To which they'll go, yes. Fantastic, can I ask you a question? It's very easy to control the conversation. We're going to look at controlling conversation techniques a bit later. And when we look at controlling conversations, you'll see how easy it is to let people speak and how empowering it is to let people speak, how you empower others, but ultimately by empowering others, giving yourself the power to be really in control, to get a satisfactory customer outcome for you and them, and ideally a positive customer outcome. So, first tip to active listening is make notes. Ask, do you mind, even if you're on the telephone, ask, do you mind if I make some notes? Why would you do that? Okay? Why else? Because I understand you're saying it gives you time, but why? Brilliant. It lets them know that you need time to make notes. And what does that do? If they know that you're making notes, what will it do to the way they communicate with you? Okay, so because you're making notes, that gives them the knowledge that you're going to need more time, which in turn slows them down. Good. Which gives you more time. Just by saying, fantastic, would you mind if I made some notes so I don't miss anything in what we're saying? To which the person speaking will go, yes, that's fantastic. Now in a face-to-face meeting, if you say, would it be okay if I make some notes? The other person can see when you've finished and will continue speaking. But on the telephone, they can't. So if you say, let's make some notes, they will slow down to give you the time. You can do little phrases like, okay, to keep them talking. But when you want to talk again, you don't need to make those noises, and they'll stop and say, did that make all set that? Did you get all of that? And you can say, okay, can I ask you something? Because another aspect to this, I've got as number 5, is ask for clarification if you're unsure on anything. So if somebody says something to you like, and I would hope, by the way, that you would do the same with me, but if somebody says something, you're not quite sure what they're saying, you don't understand the language they're using or the point they're making, you can go, okay, I hear that you're saying X, Y, Z. Can I ask you to clarify what you mean by that, because I'm not sure that I'm understanding. Not, I don't understand you, I don't understand what's being said. Very important, otherwise you'll get people's backs up. By asking for clarification, you've slowed them down, you've taken control of the conversation, and they're happy that you're listening to them actively, because if you weren't listening, you wouldn't be asking that question. Does that make sense? Good. The third tip is to acknowledge everything. So whatever they say to you, you've got to say, okay, I hear that you're saying this, or okay, I appreciate that you're doing that. Very important with active listening. If you know you have to acknowledge what people are saying, then you know you have to listen, which means you know you have to pay attention, which means you know you have to make notes, so that you can say, yes, okay, I appreciate you said this. And part 4, which leads on to that, you have to summarise what's been said to you at the end, so that you know that, or should I say, you have to summarise what's being said to you so they know that you know what they said. That makes sense. And you can do that throughout the conversation. You can say, okay, so what you're saying to me is that in order to active listen, you've got to give focus attention so that you get a high percentage of data. And then you said, you've got to make notes, take your time to let the other person speak, acknowledge everything and summarise as I'm doing now, and if I wasn't sure, I'd be asking for clarification. Does that make sense? And that's active listening. Excellent.